Hey everyone, Sean Frangella here for MotionTutorials.net with a new After Effects tutorial about how you can recreate the movie titles for X-Men Apocalypse in After Effects using Element 3D. This episode is brought to you by ArtbeatsEXPRESS. Create a free account at ArtbeatsEXPRESS, stock media by subscription, and receive complimentary broadcast quality resolution content files. No credit card payments or obligations are required. Click the link for more details. So here we have the final title sequence that I recreated in After Effects, starting with Element 3D for the text and then adding a lot of little details and tricks to get the animation going, the background particles going, a custom color overlay setup on the text using some Element 3D tricks. And at the end of this one, if you want to take a look at this project file and dig into it or customize it for your own use, you can grab this and other movie title After Effects templates in the store at MotionTutorials.net. So check that out if you want to grab this project file and really dig into how it's set up. Now for this one, I want to specifically focus on some things in Element 3D that you might not know about that you can really use to customize this and get it right, with things like really customizing our bevel edges and expansion settings, manipulating our UV mapping on our text so we can get it set up how we want it, duplicating text objects, and using this trick with showing the world position after you've added camera animation to allow you to add extra little effects on 3D layers, like this little text gradient that's sitting just on the letters. So let's get started. Here I have a new composition with two text objects with the words typed out, and this is the font Bank Gothic Bold. So if you look into the description, you can get a link to grab that online for free. And we'll use this for the basis for our text. So I'll get Element 3D set up by making a new solid, and I'll call this E3D or whatever you want. And then I'm gonna grab Element 3D from my effects, drag that on. And the way we're gonna extrude this text is we're gonna go to custom layers, custom text and mask. And this is where we can drop in our text, but I wanna customize this a little more. And one thing you can do is also use mask layers, because if we look at our final video, the text is a little different. You can see that it's not the default E from this font. The center bar is pushed to the edge, and this hyphen is a little off and we need to change it. So one thing we can do to really customize text and still use it in Element 3D is on my text, I'm gonna right click and go to create masks from text. That's gonna duplicate that text layer, make it as solid with mask outlines. And now I can grab any of those masks and shift those edges around so I can make the E a little bigger. I can double click on this hyphen and scale it down or move it. And then when I go to my E3D layer, I'll use this X-Men outlines as my custom path 1 and the word apocalypse as the font as my path layer 2. So that way you can really manipulate fonts a little more if you need something really specific. Then I'm gonna go to scene setup, and the way that we get our text set up here after we get those going is we just press this extrude button. That's gonna give us our default extrusion. If we're good with that, we can just press OK. Hide both of our text layers, and if I make a camera and pan around, there's our 3D text. There we go. But we want to really customize this and get it accurate, because again, if we look at our final product, it's a little bulkier and has these nice chiseled edges and this cool steel texture. So let's set that up. I'll go back into scene setup, and if we open up this extrusion model and take a look at this bevel 1, we can zoom in and really customize this. And the way we want to get it correct is by really adjusting all of these bevel settings. So we can extrude it more, we want it a bit wider. If we need it a little bulkier, so maybe like bold, we could expand these edges, and then it's gonna get bigger, but not only add the bevel. And we'll notice with things like this M, we're actually getting some overlapping geometry. If we change this from shaded to wireframe, we can see it's actually cutting into itself. But we can fix that if we go to the extrusion model and take a look at this tessellation. So this is how it's actually creating the geometry. If we turn this onto wireframe, we can see what's happening. We're gonna change this from high to extreme. And then we can take the spike filter down, and you can see that's gonna fix those. So now if we go to shaded, it's gonna change the way that it deals with those little holes that are overlapping, and we just need to pull this far enough into where it's catching those. Then we can go back to our bevel settings on our bevel material, and what we want to do is make our bevel size a little bigger, so you can see it's getting that nice roundness. But we can take our curve way down and basically shut it off, so you can see we're getting these nice edges. And we also want to check this bevel backside because we want both of them beveled. And there's our main text. We can add some nice customization with our bevel. Now if we go to presets and go to Pro Shaders, Metal, so this is using the Pro Shaders as a starting point, we can get this metal brushed and drag it onto this whole bevel, and it's going to replace that. And we can use this as a starting point for our material. So again, now if we go to OK, we're starting to get somewhere, but it looks pretty flat. We have a lot more little details to set up and manipulate. So I'm going to go back into scene setup. Let's make this a little more extruded. We'll put it at like 2.5. Looks a little closer. And we might want to take this bevel size down a bit. So it's getting better, but it's a little too shiny and reflective, and we're seeing too much of this bump map. And this is where I want to talk about some of these details in the material settings. So what we can do if we look at textures is check each of these on and off. And this is the images of each part of the material to make up the diffuse, specular, highlights, and normal map, which is creating that bumpiness. So we want to turn that down a bit. We don't need that much of it. We don't want it negative or completely off, but not so heavy. And we can turn down our specular highlights and even our diffuse setting a bit. So we get that steel material, but it's not so heavy. And another thing we can do if we go to our extrusion model and click on this UV mapping is we can change how it's repeating. So if we wanted it a little bigger or smaller, we could adjust this. So let's put this at repeat 2x2. And you can see that's going to make it look like there's a bit more details by doubling our material. And then I can just call this whole extrusion model X-Men. And that could be a good start for my first part of my title. Now to get the second part with the word apocalypse, since we created that separate path, is I'm going to right click on this word X-Men and I'm going to duplicate the model. And that's going to create a copy. I can drag it out of this group folder by pulling until I get the red line. And then I'm going to change that to group 2 so that I can control it separately. Now, since I already did this work on the first one, all I have to do is click on the extrusion settings on this model, change it from custom path 1 to custom path 2, and then it's going to inherit all my settings. So it's a little too chunky because of the settings that we put on the X-Men, but it's a good start. So all we need to do is go to our material, and we could take that expand edges back to 0, take our bevel size way down so we just get a little bit. And then I'm going to replace this material with this gold grunge metal. And again, use that as the starting point, but take a look closer and we can scroll down and again, manipulate this so it's not so extreme. So we probably don't even need that normal and diffuse image materials. We really only want the color settings. We could take our specular down so we get a little bit, but we're mostly just getting the gold aspect of it. And we could also manipulate these a little if we want to adjust it. And that's a good starting point for our second part of our text. I can rename this apocalypse and make sure I spell that right because it's a weird word to type out. And then I'm going to go to OK. And now I'll have both of these objects. And the first one is on group 1. So if I go to particle replicator and move this left or right or up or down, it's going to move. Same thing for group 2. And to make this a little easier for each of these groups, what I can do is go to create group null and click create, and that's going to create a null and link the position, scale, rotation of group 1 to that. So if I double press E, you can see it's written all these expressions, and that way I can move the position, scale, rotation of everything on group 1, which is just this top title, without having to dig into the settings and the effects. So I'll go do the same thing with group 2, create group null, and that way I can use these to just line this up as a starting point. And I could grab them both and kind of center it in my scene for how it will look in the end. Now, the big animation on this one is our camera move here. So at the beginning, we see our camera pulls back from the center. And then when it hits right here, the text fades in and rotates letter by letter. And that's the main animation that I want to focus on. So I'm going to make a new camera with Command-Shift-Alt-C or just go to Layer, New Camera. We'll keep a 35mm camera. We don't need depth of field for this one. I'm just going to go to OK. And if I take a look at this in 2 views, you can see here's our camera. We can just move and zoom it in. And we only need a couple keyframes for this one. And the way I like to do a quick little camera animation like this is just take a look at my active camera. I'm going to go ahead to 3 seconds in time and then grab my camera, press P and Shift A for position and point of interest, keyframe those, and cycle through my camera properties with C and just push that in Z so it's filling the frame. Then we'll go to 6 seconds and just pull that camera back a bit. So that'll be our main animation of the camera slowly pulling back. And then I'm going to go to the beginning. And again, we can just cycle through our camera tools with C and pan over and just put the camera right in between the two letters to where we don't see anything. And then if we just scrub through this, we can see the camera is going to pull back in space, slowly stop right here and get to this point, and then slowly go for 3 more seconds. And if we take a look at our 2 views, we can see that's what our camera is doing. It automatically draws this path, which is nice. And if we want to change the easing, what we can do is right click on those keyframes, easy ease in. And that way, if I just play this real quick, you can see camera pulls back, slows down, and then continues a little more. Now, you can see there's this weird little problem that happens sometimes is it's pulling away and then going forward for some reason. And if we take a look at this from all our views, you can see that the camera kind of loops around. And why would it do that? We don't want it to do that. Well, that's because there's these spatial settings as well. So how we can fix that is if we find our keyframe and get this convert vertex tool and click on that, it's going to straighten that out. The other way we could do that is if we grab this last keyframe, right click, open this up, change it to linear. It's going to remove those, so then you won't get that looping thing. So that's a quick little fix. That's a problem that I see come up a lot, and it's good to know how to fix it. Now, the next part of the animation is these second letters animating in by fading in and rotating. So let's talk about that. Now, on the group setting for this word, since we did this as text extruded, if we go to group 2, particle look, multi-object, we can enable that, and that's going to give us all these new settings. And now we can rotate, displace, scatter, and animate the letters separately, and basically every little separate object in our text or mask. So what we want to do is rotate on Y. So what I'm going to do is at 3 seconds, we'll rotate these around 90 degrees where they're pointing at the camera, and then go to 5 seconds and basically shut that off. And we can press U to get our keyframes and ease that in so it goes smoothly. And now that they're rotating, we can see they're a little too bulky, but that's okay. We can go to scene setup, and we can always adjust this and change it, and it's going to update. So we can just take that extrude down to like 1.5. It doesn't need to be as big as the main text. And we can just take a look at this in our 2 views and just make sure that they're all still lined up correctly. And we could even grab our group 2 null and pull that back towards the front. So you can always adjust those settings more later. And then we get our text animating in on rotation after this comes here. And now we need them to fade in, which is a little tricky because we're talking about 3D objects. So they don't just have opacity, they have refraction with light passing through them and refracting, and that's how opacity happens in real objects. But we just want to do kind of the traditional fade in on opacity. So how can we do that? Because there's no opacity setting here, and if I take my group null and adjust the opacity, it's not doing anything. Well, we can do that with a little trick with track mats if we wanted to animate in part of this. So what I'm going to do is just make a new solid. Doesn't matter what color it is. I'm going to call this matte. Maybe make it green so it stands out. I'm going to make that a 3D layer, and then I'm going to hold shift and parent it to my group 2 null, which doesn't look like it did much, but that'll make sure if we look at our 2 views that it's right where our text is. And then I'm going to pull that down to where it's only covering that text. And the reason that we did that as a 3D layer is now if we scrub through with our camera, that follows along. Well, what was the point of that? Now it's just blocking our text. Well, what we can do is put this above our element 3D text. And then on the element 3D layer for our track mat, set it to alpha inverted. So what it's going to do is block out those letters. If we soloed this, you can see it's going to show the opposite of whatever this is. And since it's a 3D layer, it's following it along with our text. So we're only going to see the top text. Well, what was the point of that? Because now we just can't see our bottom text animation because it's being blocked out by this track mat. Well, since it's showing the alpha value of this track mat, if we animate that value over time, so if I just turn this on and we have it fade away, then it's going to eventually not exist, so it's going to be showing the whole layer. So all that means, without getting too confusing, is again, if we take our E3D layer, do alpha inverted, and then on this matte, animate the opacity off, you can see, aha, the letters are going to fade in. So that's a pretty cool trick to fade in specific parts of something that are 3D without getting into refraction and all of those types of things. So for this, I'm going to animate it, set a keyframe right at 3 seconds, and then go ahead to about 4.5 seconds or so, animate it off. And then you'll see these are going to fade in as they're rotating. And if we want to really customize that rotation, we can grab our keyframes, go to our graph editor here, and just pull this curve so they really smoothly rotate and slow down. So the track matte is a nice little tip with animating opacity. Now the next thing is there's a light moving along this. So one cool thing with Element 3D, if we go down to our render settings, is we can change our lighting. If we use our comp lights, which we don't have any yet, we can add additional lighting. That's going to help. So we can change this to one of these different settings. You can see it looks like there's different lighting setups. So I'll try this single light one that helps a bit. And I can also add shadows and ambient occlusion. So I'm going to add ambient occlusion and change it to ray trace. So I'm going to get accurate ambient occlusion. And now I can start to add light. So what I want to do is add a new light under layer, new light, and I'm going to make it a spotlight and go to OK. And you can see the light actually will hit the 3D text and we can animate it and move it around. And if we press AA while we're on our light, we'll get our 3D properties. So we can tone down the intensity. We could change our cone angle and our cone feathering if we want it to be softer or harsher on the edges. And if we look again at our two views, we can take a look where that light is falling in 3D, and we can move it back into the side, and then just take our cone angle way down and point it at our 3D text. And we could even animate it if we want to animate our point of interest. We could check that on and have it sweep along our text a little as it's doing in the final example I set up. So we get a bit of light interaction with it moving across the letters. And if we go to our render settings and open up shadows, we can enable shadows and turn on ray trace. So we're going to actually get accurate shadows being cast on these letters. Now if we take a look at my final project, this last little trick with the second letters is I have this shape layer with a gradient on it. So you can see it's this little white to kind of goldish gradient that I'm then taking the hue and saturation out of it. And if I unsolo that, you can see it's just this little sheen that sits on everything. And if we have that sitting above our text, so you can see it's just kind of a weird block that shows on everything. What we can do is grab our Element 3D layer, duplicate it, put it above that color overlay, and then on Element 3D, change our output from show composite to world position, and it's going to make it all black and white. And if we pull the position Z of that matte back a little, you can see we'll get just the front of the letters, and then we can pull the gamma back so it's getting it just white. So we can kind of manipulate this very subtly, and now it's a black and white version of just the front of that text. So why do we do that? What we can do is on this color overlay layer, set that to Luma matte, so it's only going to show the white areas of the matte above it. And you can see it now it's locked into only the letters. So we can use tricks like that with basic little shape layers and then use the world position output and clip the matte with position Z to do extra little compositing tricks. Now in this final version, there's a couple other things. There's a color correction layer on the entire thing. There's also this little blurred out flame in the bottom, and what this is a stock clip from digitaljuice.com, which has some cool stock stuff of this fire, and it's just blurred out. So if you get the project file of this one, it'll just be a pre-rendered blurry little animation. And then there's also a couple instances of Trapcode Particular, and I have a bunch of other tutorials on getting the Trapcode Particular part set up. So if you want to learn more about those little tricks, be sure to check out some of the other tutorials. And if you want to dive into this project file and really take a look at all the little settings and edit it and recreate it for your own use or change it and make a new title out of it, you can get this project file and many others by checking out the store at motiontutorials.net/store, or clicking that thumbnail where you can grab this one or a bundle with a bunch of movie title After Effects templates, as well as learn how to set them up in the tutorials on motiontutorials.net. And if you want to get access to a lot of project files, you can also support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/Sean Frangella, where you can throw in a couple bucks to get project files by becoming a regular supporter of the show, or support the show at just a couple dollars more and get access to all the project files I've made for my tutorials. That's well over 100 now. So if you want to support the show, head over to patreon.com/Sean Frangella. And if you have any questions on this one or any tutorials, you can hit me up on Twitter. I'm at Sean Frangella, and on Facebook.com/Motion Tutorials. And be sure to subscribe if you want to check out weekly tutorials and title recreations at YouTube.com/Sean Frangella. And if you want to learn any more about the particle settings or other title recreations and time lapses in After Effects using Element 3D and other 3D software, be sure to also check out any of those other videos by clicking those thumbnails that are up there now. We'll keep talking about After Effects 3D and lots of tips and tricks. As always, thanks for watching. I will see you at the next video.